keeping count, and I'm delighted to see so many of you staying with us. It's great, and I know people are coming in as they want to specifically be present for a country discussion that they've sort of got their eye on, and so that means we've got the Russia watchers in the room now. So thank you for coming back or staying with us. Same format as before. We have got a great panel, and in fact we've got 3 already on the panel. I guess that means, yes, I'm thinking this through, it means our first speaker, who's going to give us our market report, our overview of what's happening in the Russia market right now, is actually not going to join us on the panel because she can't. But let me introduce her right now, and then I'll introduce the panel when we've heard our market overview. So welcome, please, Ekaterina Novitskaya from the ETOA, European Tour Operators Association. And Ekaterina is just going to give us an overview of Russia. So off you go.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let's move on to Russia. The population of Russia in 2012 is estimated at 143 million. In the aftermath of the collapse of the Soviet Union, it was declining by around 0.5% a year, but since then it has recovered, and it was declining by just around 0.1, 0.2% a year. There were times in 2000s when the real GDP growth of Russia almost reached 10%. However, the low demand and low prices in 2008 and 2009 for hydrocarbon and other minerals pushed this figure down to 2%, and recently the growth recovered to 4.3% in 2010-2011, and it's predicted to be 3.7% in 2012, and according to International Monetary Fund, it's going to stay around the same figure in the next 5 years. The Russian economy has been thriving on the basis of high prices on oil, gas and minerals, and also at the prevailing high international prices and high demand and huge exports of it. But the downside of that is such a called Dutch disease, which distracts all the investors from the other sectors. And this is coupled with poor legal and institutional standards in Russia. And it resulted in a very strange combination of very difficult business operating conditions, and which are coupled with plenty of money in Russia. GDP per capita in 2011 almost reached $13,000, and this is much higher than the one in China, India and South Africa, but this is more or less the same as we have in Brazil. And this figure was flattened in the beginning of 2000s because of the international crisis of 1998, but it recovered since 2005, and it has been growing since then by around 3.6%. According to Boston Consulting Group, the threshold of $15,000 allows the majority of the population to travel abroad on longer journeys quite easily. Outbound trips from Russia, as you can see from the table, they are growing from year to year, apart from the crisis of 2008-2009, where we can see a big drop on 18%. and it almost reached 44 million in 2011. Russians are very big spenders, as we know. They've been spending more and more money from one year to another, and again, except this drop of 12% of the crisis 2008 and 2009. According to international rankings, Russians were the seventh biggest spenders in the world in 2011, and they've gone up since being ninth in 2010. Regarding the airline capacity, we can see that it's been growing from year to year as well, and in 2012 number of flights reached around 1,500 and number of seats are over 200,000. Thanks for your attention. Спасибо за внимание, and these were my short notes.
Спасибо. Thank you very much indeed, Ekaterina. Thank you indeed for that. Let me introduce my panel. Right next to me we have Alina Shamsutdinova, and I'd practiced that and then I sort of slightly forgot, but Alina, welcome. Alina is Sales and Marketing Director of Business Services International, and in a moment, Alina, you can tell us exactly what that London-based tour operator does in the Russian marketplace. Next to Alina is Helène Lloyd, who is Director of the TMI Consultancy, which I believe is a sort of market research consultancy business with a lot of work in Russia and the former Soviet Union countries as well. So I want to hear a bit more about that, Helène. And then we've got Leslie back, and we heard Leslie earlier on, and Leslie's with the European Travel Commission. So Russia, it is, I always think, you know, it raises a whole set of different issues and circumstances from the other countries that, you know, unfortunately sometimes we lump with it in terms of this dreaded BRICS acronym. But Alina, tell me about your business and about your take on where the Russian sort of tourism and travel market is right now.
I'm representing Business Services International. This is a company providing all the facilities for Russians and citizens from CIS countries to United Kingdom and Ireland. We provide all the facilities starting from visa support, accommodation, transfers. We provide our own excursions with Russian-speaking guides and all other facilities for VIP clients, starting from VIP meet and greet at the airport, booking all the concierge services like restaurants, clubs, etc. We also do a weekly groups program starting from Saturday, so we provide excursions for the Russians coming on a weekly basis. And
what kind of numbers in the last year, say, have you had coming through using your services?
Well, if we speak about on an annual basis, it's about 200,000.
200,000. And what proportion of those travellers are from Russia, and what proportion from the other countries that make up the CIS or the former Soviet states?
Well, of course, I mean, it's most of them Russians. I would say maybe 75%, and then the rest 25 is from CIS.
And do you know, the Russian economic story is somewhat complicated, and as Ekaterina indicated, it's sort of tied to the price of oil and gas to a certain extent, so it's not entirely predictable. Do you see a very positive and consistent growth trend, or do you worry about where that market is going?
Well, I would say at this moment we try to develop market of Azerbaijan, which is CIS countries. Most of the oil and gas companies based there, so now we get more tourists and the business traveler from this country.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm just thinking about Russia, by far your biggest marketplace. I mean, Russia's economy too does sort of succeed or fail according to the price of oil and gas to a certain extent, and I just wonder whether that may be a problem going forward, that it's still an economy that is too much tied to a very unpredictable and volatile set of commodity prices.
Well, if we speak about middle-class people, they all try to save money and they all travel in groups. And if we speak about business travelers, I wouldn't say we touch this group of people if we're talking about oil and gas industry. Right. So they don't care about money. When they come to United Kingdom, they really spend a lot of money, and we even don't touch any industry bases if we...
Yes. Helène, let me ask you, are you very positive about the future of the Russian market and the strength of the Russian economy, and therefore the continued rise of numbers of people with enough expendable income to undertake vacations in Europe?
Yeah, no, certainly it's a very dynamic market. It grows year on year, except for in 2009, when I think nearly all markets actually had a reduction in the number of tourists. But even by 2010, there was a big increase again, and it overtook actually the figures from 2008. So it wasn't just an increase compared to 2009. It showed an overall aggregate growth. So it's 43 million people traveling abroad. Some of them just going to other CIS countries, some going to Europe. The leisure figures that are actually shown are purely leisure, so they're actually a kind of underestimation of the number of people traveling. So it's a big amount of people traveling. Europe is only 3.5 hours away, or 3 hours in some cases, so it's not a long-haul destination. Sure. It's relatively cheap for Russians to come to Europe, and there's quite a lot of competition now with flights. So this is not an expensive destination.
But is it a hasslesome destination?
Some destinations, of course, are, limiting their potential due to the visas. But basically what's happened over the last sort of 5 years, many of the European countries have set up a sort of system called visa offices. And they, in all the key cities around Russia, so there's maybe, say, Greece will have 10 offices, Spain will have 15. So you can actually just go in your local town, submit your visa to the visa office. They deal with all the paperwork, and you can pick it up, in 4 or 5 days' time. So it's not as difficult as it was in the past, where people expected, from Vladivostok to fly 9 hours to Moscow to submit your visa, basically asking people to go from London to further than New York in order to deal with a visa, which is crazy. So they are kind of dealing with that problem. Many countries are abolishing visas to Russians. Israel did that in 2009. Many of the Middle East countries, most of Latin America now has abolished visas.
Really?
So it's changing all the time. It's getting better and better.
That's interesting, because that means Europe has a competitive disadvantage. If you're vying for the Russian travel and tourist dollar, or ruble, and you have, still somewhat time-consuming and vexing visa processes to go through, and some of your rival destinations don't, then you've got a problem. Yeah,
in a way it prevents people doing spontaneous travel. But many people, I can say our office in Moscow, we have mainly Russians working there, apart from myself, and many of them now, they were just offered multiple entry visas because they can see within Schengen that they're traveling frequently, so they just go to get another French visa and they say, okay, we'll give you one for 3 years. So the kind of upper middle class, if you like, are really actually not having so many problems with visas as in the past, because it's much easier to get a visa, a multiple entry visa. Britain normally does that. If you've been 3 times to Britain, come back without any problems, they can offer you a multiple entry visa over a number of years, or a year or 3 years. So it is slowly, it's really so much better than it was 8 or 10 years ago. It is inconvenient, it is a hassle. People would travel much more. I'm sure there would be like 1,000% increase overnight if visas were removed to the Schengen zone and to Britain. But meanwhile, the figures still grow. Places like Greece got 56% growth last year. Spain, I think, got around 57%. They're also very high growth figures, what I've seen for the first half of this year. So it's not stopping the growth, actually. Particularly Southern Europe, it's a traditional place where Russians go on holiday in the summer, and they're not going to change that, I don't think. Right. Visas or no visas. visas.
Well,
that's the nearest place to come.
Sure. I mean, I knew that we would need to talk about visas a little bit, but the other thing I think we have to talk about a little bit is systemic corruption and the difficulties of doing business in Russia if you're, you know, from outside Russia. And in certain sectors of business and industry, we've seen Western companies really struggle.
I think that's
to
more
work
in the
in
oil
Russia.
and gas industry. I don't think you'll see much of that in the tourism industry, frankly speaking. Because it's a wide open market. I mean, there's huge competition. There's very little room to, you know, to do anything, frankly speaking.
How does it work in Russia? How do most Russians book their vacations, their holidays? How do they do it?
Depends where they're going, what age group they're from, which segment of the market they're from. If you're talking about the upper middle class, the rather sophisticated travelers who look very similar to any European upper middle class person, they're often booking online because they already have a multiple entry visa, or if they're going to a non-visa country, they don't have to deal with a visa, so they're more likely to book directly. If they're a first-time traveler, somebody from the Russian region, somebody maybe not speaking a foreign language, they probably would prefer to book through a tour operator, so through a travel agency. And then within that whole sector, you've got the large tour operators who distribute their packages to all the travel industry. You've also got the kind of VIP sector, which is like luxury travel agents who are really serving, say, 100, 150 high income clients, and they're not focused on a particular destination. They're focused on the individual, where they want to go, what they want to do. They go to them for ideas, for consultation. So you've got quite a sophisticated element of the travel market working there.
Okay, and Alina, in the different countries we've discussed today, we've talked about the nature of the typical, if there is such a thing, the typical traveller from those countries. Talk me through your customers, the typical Russian travellers that you work with. What do they want out of a destination? You know, what really gets them fired up? What gives them a buzz? What when they book a holiday, what are they looking for?
Well, because I'm based in the United Kingdom and we do inbound tourism to UK and Ireland, I can speak only about Great Britain. So I would say the tourist from Russia is about like 24 to 44 years old, which is quite a young person. More male than female traveling, and they're all looking for the traditional heritage, more educational and exciting tours rather than relaxing. So they prefer, they think that spend 1 week in Great Britain, it's much better than spending a week in France or somewhere in the Schengen country. If we talk about visas, yeah, it's more difficult maybe to get a visa to United Kingdom rather than Schengen countries. But we've got about 12.5 million people, leisure clients, out of 40 million travelers. And of course, I mean, London is an international capital, so most of them, they're coming for business, but still, it's so many things to do in London as well as United Kingdom, like a whole.
We do see plenty of Russians in London, that's for sure.
So we work quite well.
Yes. Leslie, you sort of take a European overview of this. Is it likely, do you think, anytime soon that there will be visa-free travel from Russia to Europe?
Well, I think it's more, the discussion goes beyond tourism. My understanding also from the country in which I work, which is Malta. The issue of Schengen visas revolves around a wider set of discussions between the EU and Russia.
Yes, well, on the basis of that, it doesn't look very good because, frankly, relations between Putin's government and a whole bunch of Western governments haven't been particularly good recently.
And I would dare speculate in terms of what you are saying that the visa issue becomes a bargaining chip in these relations. Nevertheless, in line with what the other panelists have said, in spite of the visa issue, the Russian market remains big for a lot of European destinations, whether they're in Schengen or not.
Yeah, but it's interesting you've introduced the idea of a political context, because I was very struck in our debate about China when one of the panelists said, yeah, well, you know, there was a particular problem, a political problem between the Chinese government and the West, and we saw an immediate impact on bookings, because a lot of Chinese visitors thought, well, you know what, right now I'll opt out. I mean, is the Russian marketplace as vulnerable to political chill between...
I don't think so. I think the Russian travelers are much more independent. I can certainly remember, was it in 2010 when Egypt had a problem, and actually, you know, many countries just stopped sending tourists there, and tourists themselves stopped going there.
Yeah.
The Russians carried on going, and the Russian government kept saying to the tour operators, please don't send any more charters, please don't send any more charters. And at a certain point they said, listen, stop sending charters, because if not, we're going to do something to you, you know. So they were really imposed on them, because the public are quite independent and will do whatever. They bought their holiday, they wanted to go to Egypt, and nobody was going to stop them.
So travel advisors wouldn't affect them? Or
not so much. Of course, there is some influence. I remember that there was a travel advisory about Spain. There was a problem, I think, to do with this... not mad cow's disease, something that was going on.
But I was thinking more just a political chill between governments, you know. I mean, for example, it hasn't happened because Mitt Romney's lost the election, but Mitt Romney was saying, you know, Russia, in my view, is our #1 strategic enemy. So you can't imagine that relations between a Mitt Romney administration and Putin's Russia would have been very good. And I just wonder, you know, when tour operators are wondering whether to invest big time in the Russian marketplace, whether they ought to be worried about the potential politics that surrounds Russia's relationship with various Western countries.
I wouldn't see the risk as high as it is with markets like China. I mean, with the China example, more recently, destinations like Japan and the Philippines are feeling the heat because of the islands'
regional issues.
Where demand actually dries up very visibly and very quickly. But I do tend to agree that the Russian market is much more, first of all, there's a longer history. It's much more developed. It's shorter haul, and the travelers have evolved to become much more independent in the way they view their travel choices.
Although, I mean, you're painting a picture of incredibly independent Russians wandering all around Europe. But Alina, yours perspective slightly different. Your Russians are coming on very organized packages.
Online bookings growing up right now in Russia, it's about 11% already of Russians, they book online. So they try, and now they learn how to book their trip themselves.
Right.
So they now mostly use booking.com as well. It's quite a popular website in Russia. They do book services online as well as transfers and excursions. So they now try sort of, as Helène said, the middle class. So they try to save money, and they try to book everything possible online. When high-level people, they have their own PAs who use us or other travel agents who book everything for them here.
Okay. Who would like to ask a question or make a comment about the Russian market and what's going on in Russia today? Yes, we've got a hand up here. Let's get you the microphone.
Good afternoon, Susan. I'm a student. I want to ask another question about the economic aspects of the tourism in Russia. You told us that a lot of Russians go to Spain or Greece, and actually in Spain and Greece we have a little bit of an economic crisis. Do they go in other countries? Have you seen the number of Russians increase, for example, in Germany because they can't go in Spain, or they don't want to go in Spain or Greece?
They want to go in Spain and Greece, and the numbers were over 50%, so it hasn't deterred them at all.
Yeah, I think Spanish embassy is the most busiest embassies in Russia now.
So despite a couple of years of financial fear and crisis in Spain and Greece, that doesn't affect...
I think it attracts, because actually hotels,
you know, are
more able to negotiate. You know, there's always, if you offer a discount or you offer an extra, Russians are very inclined to be, you know, tempted by that.
Right.
So, you know, Turkey actually had this year a small decrease, I think around about 12%, and a lot of that was picked up by Greece because the hotel prices went down slightly in Greece, and in Turkey they're gradually rising every year, even though Turkey's still the #1 destination.
I was going to say, Turkey must be a huge market.
It's the #1 destination, but I tell you what, Greece and Spain are not snapping at their heels. They're all there in the top, you know, 5 or 6, so they're catching up pretty fast, and if they didn't have visas, They would be a hard competition, I think, for Turkey.
And where does plucky old Britain fit?
Plucky old Britain fits in the top 20 still.
Top 20.
Top 20?
And, yeah, the most popular countries are Turkey, Egypt and China for 2010, because none of these countries required a visa for the Russian people.
Right.
Yeah. Well, China a couple of weeks ago announced that they need a visa for the Russians to come. So it might be.
But Alina, I hate to tell you, but you're in the wrong country then. I mean, you've pulled the short straw.
It's a higher spend tourist that comes, a better level of tourists,
it's
a
the
higher
luxury end
spend.
tourist.
So, you know, it's a different segment of the market, I would say, maybe than the Egypt tourists.
Well, Egypt's interesting, because I was in Cairo last week when the British government, there was a bit of confusion about it, but it seemed to be issuing another travel advisory saying Sinai don't go to, and the whole of Egypt has a high terror risk, and then it seemed they retracted a bit of this advice. But nonetheless, what you're saying is the Russian holidaying public wouldn't necessarily have been put off by that.
It's a very robust public.
No,
they
amazing.
don't necessarily believe everything that's written, and if you offer a good promotion alongside it, they can totally ignore that.
Well, you
risk.
certainly get a good deal in Egypt today, so I guess on that basis they'll be going there in huge numbers. All right. Any other Russia thoughts or questions? We'd love any. Yeah, go on.
Hi, Nick Greenfield, ETOA. I'm curious what the panel think about the idea that quite a lot of us would like to go to Russia. I went to Russia for the first time this year. It's a very expensive long weekend trip. The visa's easy, but it costs a lot of money. But the more that people from Russia come to the rest of Europe and we go from Europe to Russia, will that also help cultural exchange and encourage people to travel more? Because I'm quite keen on this idea that that's something. We tend to see Russia as somewhere else, as not particularly European. But surely travel can help in that way. Well, I don't know what the panel thinks about that.
Yeah, I think it's very important, and I think that Russia is part of Europe. It's definitely part of the European family, and if you've been to Moscow, you'll see it's seeped deeply in European culture. So I think that it certainly helps the more people travel. I think I've even seen service levels increase hugely in Moscow, just because people travel abroad and they say, I want this now, I no longer want this lower level. You've got to hit the international
But if that reciprocal arrangement is really helpful and beneficial to Russia in the long run, why on earth are visas to Russia so expensive? You know, it's really off-puttingly expensive.
Yeah, it's outsourced to a private company.
Well,
So
that's not
that's
a
very
good
efficient.
excuse.
It's
Well,
extremely efficient.
That just makes me even more furious.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, somebody's making vast profits off the back of anybody who needs to get into Russia.
Yeah, no, it's not a very tourism-friendly policy. It's true.
Have you discussed this with your Russian friends?
I think the thing is that actually if you apply directly and you apply with a 5-day lead period, it's actually not that expensive. It's much cheaper than the British visa.
Yeah, but...
Because the British visa is also very expensive.
Is it?
Yeah.
How much is the British visa?
Yeah, I think it's about £76.
Well,
£78.
you mean to get a British visa in Russia?
Yeah.
Yes.
And Nick, how much is the visa you need to get here to go to Russia?
I think... Oh, there we are, sorry. Helen's put her finger on it because a lot of people going over there, they will use a special service. I used a fast-track service because I found out very last minute, and it cost me 120-something pounds.
Me too.
But that's because you're doing it fast-track. If you did go through the slower process, it's true that it's a lot less. But the trouble is I see it, the Russian market, St. Petersburg and Moscow, St. Petersburg are members of our association, they would love to get more European visitors on short and long weekend city breaks. But, you know, my flight costs less than the visa to Moscow. But I agree with the idea that it is a little bit of a political bargaining chip. And the trouble as well is that you have 26 countries in Schengen, and they're all having these sort of bilateral negotiations with one country. So Putin or Medvedev will say, tomorrow we will abolish visas, but he knows also that they're having all these bilateral ideas. You ask the Greeks, you ask the Spanish, would you like to abolish visas tomorrow? They say yes. You ask the Germans or you ask the Brits, they're a little more reluctant.
Yes, indeed. Well, I'm not sure that's going to change anytime soon. But any other...
I just would
Sorry,
like to add, like Nick said, that, you can get a visa here like in 2 days, but you need to pay some extra money. Russians, unfortunately, don't have such a service. They maybe wish to pay like about £100 extra, but
You can't,
in Russia.
You can't do the fast track in Russia?
No.
Okay.
Only in St. Petersburg you can, but this is only one city.
Right. Right. Anybody else? Right. Madam, you, and then Madam, you at the back. But
staying on subject of visas, we know that lately USA visas have been relaxed, Russia, USA. How did this reflect kind of traffic between two countries, taking in account the frosty relationship, let's say, in the past between two countries? Has it been like rapidly increased?
It has definitely increased. I don't have the figure actually on me, but definitely it's a positive trend for sure. And there's a lot more agencies now selling the USA. So the minute you see some sort of change in the visas, it always has an impact.
But presumably there's a big price differential in the ticket, if nothing else, to get to America.
Sure. But if you just look at any country, as soon as they drop the visa, it's just big boom usually. Yeah. I remember Israel was, I think, 160% increase. So if you want an increase, just reduce or make the visas easier.
Right.
Or, you know, like the United States did. I don't know the percentage increase, but it's definitely a good increase.
Yes, right. We'll have to make this the last one because we're slightly short of time. Go on, ma'am.
Yes, I just want to ask how easy it is to set up a company in Russia in the travel business.
Good question. Who knows the answer?
I can only talk about a foreign representation, which is the system that I have. So I have a British company which is registered in Russia as a foreign representation. That's extremely easy and straightforward. But that means that you don't actually trade with Russian companies. If you want to set up as a commercial entity, if you're going to be a branch of a foreign company, I also don't think it's very difficult. They've done a lot of streamlining over the last 4 to 5 years to make it as simple as possible. And the Russian government's really trying to encourage foreign investors and highly educated foreign people to come and work in Russia. So they've also hugely simplified the visa system, the ability to get a work permit, because they want to attract highly skilled people and business. So
but I have to say, Helène, you paint a very rosy picture. I've had people on Hard Talk, very big business people who've worked in Russia, invested huge amounts of money in Russia, and been very badly burned by the corruption within the official system there, who have said to me, any business person looking to invest in Russia right now needs their head examining. I mean,
I think it's maybe it's for certain sectors, but if you look at IKEA's opened, I don't know, 15 different shops there. It's their principle, they say up front, we never pay anyone 1 ruble, 1 euro, we just don't bribe. If it takes us longer, it'll take us longer. And they always come out in all their press conferences and all their information saying, we've never bribed anyone in Russia, we're never going to do that, we make 80% of our furniture which we sell in Russia. So I think, as an international example, that's somebody who's just excelled.
Sure,
it maybe depends, if you're in the oil and gas
trade examples,
sector,
you can talk about William Browder and Heritage Capital and what happened to them. I mean, I guess my feeling is you just have to be aware it's a pretty, it can be a pretty rough, tough environment.
Yeah. I think, if you go to many European countries, it's not that easy to set up a business either. There's a lot of bureaucracy, there's a lot of red tape. Russia's tried to cut that down. The level of corruption, like I say, is more likely to affect you if you're a Russian company, frankly speaking. As a foreign company, you're kind of insulated up to a point from that.
Well, if you are, madam, setting up a business in Russia, good luck. Come back next year and tell us how it's going. Anyway, I think we have to draw a close there because we've got one more session to do, ladies and gentlemen, and we're right on our deadline. So please give a warm hand to our Russia panel. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks. And we'll start again in 2 minutes. 2 minutes, ladies and gentlemen.